Um, Imagine it is Wednesday morning. You just came back from a week-long vacation at the beach, right?
The classic reset.
Exactly. For 7 days, you didn't check Slack. You didn't look at your email. You just listened to the ocean.
Sounds amazing.
It does. But now it's Wednesday, and as you stare at your inbox, your chest just tightens.
Yeah, that dread.
That crushing exhaustion is completely back. I mean, you feel entirely incompetent, and honestly, you're deeply cynical about every single project on your desk.
Right.
So you're sitting there thinking, why didn't the vacation work? Why do you feel like you never even left?
Well, because you aren't just tired. I mean, you really can't cure a systemic cognitive drain with just a few days of physical rest.
And that is the harsh, eliminating reality we are digging into today. Welcome to today's deep dive.
Glad to be here.
We are taking a very specific clinical look, something you have, probably joked about with your coworkers,
Yeah.
but maybe you felt it deeply in your own life, which is occupational burnout.
Yeah, it's incredibly common.
It really is. And our mission today is to unpack a concise, but just incredibly revealing brief from Coping and Healing Counseling.
Which goes by CHC, right?
Right, exactly, CHC. And this brief is all about what burnout actually is, how it systematically dismantles our mental reserves, and how modern telehealth is fundamentally changing our ability to access the care needed to fix it.
It's a huge shift in the landscape.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the sources we're looking at today are not about general wellness.
No, definitely not.
We aren't talking about like taking a bubble bath to unwind. We are talking about concrete, evidence-based interventions for when our careers drain us far beyond normal human limits.
And that is a critical distinction to make right out of the gate. We throw the word burnout around so casually,
Totally.
Like you have a long Tuesday, you have to stay late for a meeting, and you tell your partner, oh, I'm so burnt out.
Guilty as charged, yeah.
Right. But the material we are reviewing from CHC frames this as a highly specific, measurable clinical condition.
It's not just the feeling of having a long week.
Exactly. It's a physiological and psychological state.
So before we can even look at the solutions CHC offers, we have to clearly define the beast, so to speak. And the brief points us directly to the World Health Organization's specific criteria for occupational burnout.
Yeah, the WHO has very clear guidelines on this.
They do. They define it in 3 very distinct pillars. So the first is bone-deep exhaustion.
Which is a very deliberate phrasing.
Right. The second is a growing cynicism toward your job. And the third is the feeling that you are no longer good at something you used to be highly competent at.
That last one is brutal for a lot of people.
I can imagine. And there is a diagnostic rule attached here, too. If 2 of those 3 things sound like your life over the last 6 months, it is time to pay serious attention.
Yeah, 6 months is the key time frame there.
Let's start with that first pillar, though, because bone-deep exhaustion sounds a lot different than just, needing a nap.
What's fascinating here is the fundamental difference in the biological mechanisms of physical tiredness versus the insidious nature of emotional and cognitive exhaustion.
How do you mean?
Well, think about it like this. If you go run a marathon, your muscles are depleted of glycogen. You're physically exhausted.
Sure, your legs feel like jelly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But you rest, you drink some water, you sleep, and your cellular tissue regenerates. That physical exhaustion has a very straightforward biological remedy.
Right, you bounce back.
But the exhaustion of burnout is entirely cognitive.
The best way I could conceptualize that from the reading is to compare it to a smartphone battery.
Oh, that's a great way to look at it.
It's like waking up and your internal battery says 100%. You slept 8 hours, you're plugged in.
You feel ready to go.
Right. But the absolute second you open a single work application or look at a single spreadsheet, you literally watch that green battery icon turn red and plummet immediately to 10%.
That is a highly accurate representation of what is happening neurologically.
Really?
Yeah, because when you are experiencing occupational burnout, you are dealing with chronic, unmanaged stress. Your brain is essentially constantly marinating in cortisol.
Wow. Marinating in cortisol. That sounds awful.
It is. And over time, that chronic stress literally weakens the neural pathways to your prefrontal cortex.
Okay, and the prefrontal cortex does what exactly?
It's essentially your brain's CEO. It handles all the planning, focus, and emotional regulation.
Oh, yeah.
So when the CEO gets locked out of the office by chronic stress, of course your battery plummets.
That makes total sense.
Sleep alone doesn't refill that tank because the drain isn't physical exertion, It is a damaged capacity to regulate stress.
That makes so much sense. And Honestly, it leads directly into the second pillar, which is cynicism.
Yes, the cynicism.
Because if your battery drops to 10% the moment you log in and your brain's CEO is locked out of the office, well, cynicism just feels like an inevitable byproduct.
It absolutely is.
Suddenly, every email from a coworker feels like a personal attack. Every all-hands meeting feels completely pointless.
And we often judge ourselves for that cynicism, right? We think we are just being negative or, I don't know, becoming a bad employee.
Yeah, you start to feel guilty about having a bad attitude.
Exactly. But neurologically speaking, that cynicism is actually a maladaptive defense mechanism
Wait, a defense mechanism against what? The work itself.
against energy expenditure.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because empathy requires energy. Caring about the outcome of a project requires executive function.
Which is locked out.
Right. When your brain recognizes that you are critically low on cognitive reserves, it starts rationing.
Oh, it just shuts down the caring part.
Essentially, yes. Your brain says, I have no energy left to care about this quarterly report, so to protect what little energy I have remaining, I will actively devalue the report.
That is wild.
I will convince myself it is stupid and pointless. Cynicism is really just your brain trying to stop the bleeding.
That is incredible to think about. It's not an attitude problem at all. It's an energy rationing strategy by a depleted brain.
Exactly.
If you're listening to this and realizing your recent negativity is actually just your brain trying to protect you,
Yeah.
I mean, that reframes everything.
It's a huge paradigm shift for a lot of people.
But then we hit the third pillar, which feels like the cruelest symptom of all, honestly. The loss of professional efficacy, or just the feeling that you're suddenly bad at your job.
It is devastating. And the reason it is so devastating is that for many people, especially the demographic most prone to clinical burnout, their entire identity is inextricably tied to their professional competence.
Oh, for sure. We are talking about the high achievers, the people who always say yes, the designated problem solvers.
Precisely. The people who pride themselves on being the smartest person in the room.
Right.
But when burnout strips away your cognitive energy, your working memory just suffers.
So things get harder to do.
Much harder. Things that used to take you an hour now take 3 hours. You start dropping the ball on small details.
And you notice it.
You do. You look at your own output and you genuinely believe, I am failing. I am losing my intelligence.
Oh, man.
You lose the very thing that historically gave you a sense of worth and stability.
It's like the burnout hollows you out from the inside and then convinces you it's your own fault for being hollow.
That is a very poetic but very accurate way to put it.
Which kind of brings us back to that scenario I mentioned at the very beginning of the deep dive, the great vacation fallacy.
Ah, yes.
Because society tells us that if you are feeling exhausted, cynical, and incompetent, you just need a week in the mountains or like a week at the beach.
Which brings us to the Wednesday test, arguably the most reliable non-clinical diagnostic tool discussed in the material.
I want to really dig into this Wednesday test because I think a lot of people sitting in their cars or walking their dogs right now feel a tremendous amount of guilt that their expensive vacations didn't just magically fix them.
Right. They think, what's wrong with me?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the brief explains that you take your time off, you disconnect, and maybe Monday morning you feel a tiny bit refreshed.
Maybe a little bit, yeah.
Tuesday's annoying. But by Wednesday, your mental state has completely reverted to exactly where it was before you left.
Like clockwork.
All that exhaustion, all that cynicism, it's back in full force by hump day.
And that specific lack of recovery is the primary indicator that separates true clinical burnout from just being ordinarily tired.
Because ordinary tiredness goes away.
Right, because, again, ordinary tiredness is cured by a cessation of work. Burnout is not.
But let me push back on this for a second, or at least, play devil's advocate here.
Sure, go ahead.
If you take a vacation and you come back, and by Wednesday you are miserable again, isn't there a simpler explanation? Like, isn't that just a sign you inherently hate your job?
That's a common assumption, yeah.
How do we separate standard job dissatisfaction, like maybe you just work for a terrible manager or the commute is just awful, from actual clinical burnout?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to look at what is happening to a person's underlying psychological baseline.
Okay.
Hating your job is entirely situational. If you hate your boss and you quit and go to a healthy new company with a great manager, the misery generally stays behind at the old job.
Right, you bounce back pretty quick.
Exactly. But clinical burnout fundamentally alters your baseline.
So if it alters this baseline, it just follows you.
It absolutely follows you. You could land your absolute dream job tomorrow with a great salary and a wonderful team, But if you are carrying clinical burnout, you just will not have the cognitive capacity to enjoy it or perform well in it.
Because the tank is still empty.
Right. Your executive function is still impaired. Your resilience is still depleted. And this is exactly why the CHC text emphasizes that a licensed clinician is required.
Because it's not just about switching careers. It's about diagnosing the internal damage.
Yes. Only a professional can look at your symptoms and figure out if you are carrying occupational burnout, clinical depression, severe anxiety, or some complex intertwined combination of all three.
I imagine those conditions look incredibly similar from the outside, even to the person experiencing them.
Oh, they overlap significantly. I mean, depression causes profound exhaustion and a massive loss of competence.
It's like burnout.
Exactly. And severe anxiety causes crippling fatigue because your nervous system is constantly firing.
So it's all tangled up.
It really is. If you try to treat deep-seated clinical depression with a 2-week vacation, you are going to be incredibly frustrated when you return.
That makes total sense.
A clinician untangles that knot so you know exactly which psychological mechanisms you actually need to target.
So if a vacation just pauses the environment without fixing that underlying baseline, how do we actually repair the baseline?
That's the good question.
How do we stop the brain from bleeding energy? The CHC material highlights actual evidence-based treatments, specifically calling out cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, and behavioral activation.
Yeah, these are the two heavy hitters when it comes to clinical recovery from burnout.
Okay.
They target the mechanics of the condition, not just the surface symptoms.
Let's start with CBT then. The brief notes that CBT specifically helps rewire the thinking that keeps you saying yes to things when your tank is already way past empty.
Right.
Let me run an analogy by you just to see if I'm grasping the mechanics of this.
Sure, let's hear it.
Is CBT, in this context, sort of like rewriting the spam filter in your brain? Like you are training your internal systems to automatically flag and block requests that drain your energy, rather than letting them bypass your defenses, clutter up your inbox, and just crash your system.
That is a phenomenal analogy.
Oh, awesome.
Because what happens in burnout is that your internal spam filter completely fails, and this is usually due to underlying beliefs about your own worth.
Interesting.
Let's walk through what a therapist would actually do. Say it's a Tuesday afternoon, and a colleague emails you asking you to take on an extra project that is completely outside your scope of work.
Right, a classic boundary violation.
Exactly. Without CBT, your immediate automatic thought is likely, if I don't say yes to this, they will think I'm incompetent. Or, I'm the only one who can do this right, and if I drop the ball, the whole team fails.
I feel like we've all had those exact thoughts.
Oh, definitely. And the consequence of that belief is that you say yes, and you drain your remaining 5% of energy.
Right.
CBT intercepts that automatic belief.
How does it intercept it, though?
It teaches you to interrogate the thought like a scientist. A clinician will ask you, is it actually factually true that you are the only human being in the company who can do this task?
Probably not.
Right. Is it factually true that your worth as an employee is tied entirely to this one email?
Definitely not.
Exactly. You learn to recognize that your anxiety is just lying to you. You rewrite the rule in the spam filter so that you can establish a boundary without all the accompanying guilt that usually forces you into saying yes.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Setting boundaries stops the active bleeding of energy at work.
It does.
But, stopping the bleeding doesn't magically put blood back into the system, right?
Yeah.
Which I assume is why the second treatment, behavioral activation, is introduced in the brief.
This raises an important question, though. Why do those boundaries deteriorate so severely in the first place?
Why do they?
Often it's because work has slowly, systematically cannibalized every other part of our identity over a period of years.
Man, that's heavy. The brief says behavioral activation is designed to get the rest of your life back online outside of work.
Right.
But I have to admit, when I first read behavioral activation, my immediate thought was that it just means, like, doing more things.
A lot of people think that.
Which sounds like a horrible prescription for someone who is suffering from bone-deep exhaustion. Like, oh, you're exhausted. Go be more active.
It sounds incredibly counterintuitive, I know.
Yeah.
But it is not about just being busy or productive.
Okay.
It is about deliberate, structured re-engagement with non-work aspects of your life to rebuild a fractured sense of self.
So getting your identity back.
Think about what happens when you are burnt out. What are the very first things to drop away?
Your hobbies, seeing your friends, basically anything that brings you joy but doesn't, pay the bills.
Exactly. You stop reading books, you stop gardening, you stop calling your friends on the weekend.
Because you're just too tired.
Because your brain is trying to conserve every single ounce of energy for work. You shrink your world down to just your job.
Wow.
Behavioral activation is a clinical, structured way of forcing positive inputs back into your nervous system. A therapist isn't going to tell an exhausted person to go join a soccer league.
Right, that would be too much.
They are going to give you micro steps.
What does a micro step actually look like in practice for someone whose battery is at 1%?
It might look like this. On Tuesday night, when you get home and you just want to stare at the wall, your assignment is to spend exactly 5 minutes watering one plant.
Just 5 minutes.
Just 5. Or spending 10 minutes walking around the block without a podcast, just looking at the neighborhood.
Okay.
Or scheduling a 5-minute phone call with a friend where you are emphatically not allowed to talk about work.
That sounds doable, actually.
The goal is not productivity. The goal is to send a tangible signal to your brain that you exist outside of your job title. You are intentionally turning the power back onto the other rooms in your house, one tiny light bulb at a time.
That is beautifully put. Reestablishing that you are a multifaceted human being, not just a labor machine.
Precisely.
And again, this highlights why the clinician is so vital. A licensed therapist has to identify the exact mix of your symptoms to dictate which of these treatments to push and when.
That's the art of therapy.
Right. Like, if you are deeply depressed, behavioral activation might need to come first just to get you out of bed to water that plant.
Exactly.
But if you are highly anxious and overfunctioning, CBT might be the priority to calm the panic of saying no.
The sequencing of treatment is just as important as the treatment itself.
Okay, so we understand the biological and psychological mechanics of the beast, and we know exactly how CBT and behavioral activation work to rewire the baseline.
Right.
But all of this theory is completely useless if you can't actually access the clinician. I mean, theory doesn't heal people. Access to care heals people.
100%.
And this brings us to how Coping and Healing Counseling, CHC, is structuring their practice. Because when your battery is at 10%, the logistics of finding a therapist take 20%.
Oh, the logistics of mental health care, the friction of the system, are often the absolute biggest hurdle to receiving care.
Let's talk about how CHC is removing that friction, starting with their scope and tech.
Sure.
The brief outlines that CHC offers 100% UPA-compliant telehealth therapy, and they are serving all 159 counties in the state of Georgia.
Treating a geographic footprint of 159 counties via telehealth is a massive logistical undertaking, but it fundamentally shifts the paradigm of care.
It really does. They have a team of over 15 licensed therapists, licensed clinical social workers, licensed professional counselors, licensed marriage and family therapists.
A really solid mix of credentials.
Yeah, and the source explicitly highlights that they form a diverse and culturally competent team.
Mm.
I want to unpack that because cultural competence isn't just a buzzword. It changes the clinical outcome.
Yeah. Absolutely. When you are covering an entire state, the cultural context of a patient living in urban, downtown Atlanta is vastly different from a patient living in a rural agricultural community in South Georgia.
Right. Completely different worlds.
The pressures are different. The family dynamics are different. The economic realities are different. Having a culturally competent team means the practice isn't just reading from a one-size-fits-all script.
They actually understand the context.
Yes. They can match the right licensed clinician to the right patient, ensuring the patient feels implicitly understood. That shared context is the foundation of a successful therapeutic alliance.
And their services reflect that broad, comprehensive capability. They offer individual therapy, couples therapy, family therapy, and even teen therapy for ages 13 and up.
They really cover the lifespan.
They even offer life coaching. And their specialties align perfectly with what we've been discussing: anxiety, depression, trauma, PTSD, grief, relationships, and severe stress.
All the major interconnected issue.
But what I find most profound here is the psychology of access. Think about the friction of traditional therapy when you have bone-deep exhaustion.
It's a lot.
You have to research a clinic, call them during your work hours, commute in rush hour traffic, sit in a waiting room, and then drive home. When you are burnt out, that is just an impossible mountain to climb.
It's too much activation energy.
Exactly. By making it 100% telehealth, CHC is removing the exact physical barriers that the burnout creates. You can get evidence-based CBT while sitting on your own couch in your sweatpants.
It dramatically lowers the activation energy required to get help. When a patient has no energy left to seek a solution, the solution basically has to come directly to the patient.
And it's not just the physical barrier they are lowering, it's the financial barrier, which might be even more crucial.
So true.
The brief is very transparent about their financial accessibility. For Medicaid patients, CHC offers a $0 copay. $0.
That is massive.
And for most commercial insurance plans, they specifically list Aetna, Cigna, Blue Cross Blue Shield, United Healthcare, and Humana. Sessions run between just $10 and $40.
The clinical impact of a $0 copay really cannot be overstated. Financial stress and occupational burnout are deeply intertwined.
It creates a specific kind of mental trap, doesn't it?
It does. It is a brutal catch-22. You feel entirely trapped in a job that is destroying your cognitive baseline because you desperately need the paycheck to survive.
Right, you can't just quit.
But because you are barely surviving financially, you cannot afford the $150 an hour therapy required to treat the burnout the job is causing.
So you're just stuck.
The poverty compounds the burnout, and the burnout limits your economic mobility. By accepting Medicaid with a $0 copay and keeping commercial copays to the cost of a few cups of coffee, CHC is actively breaking that cycle of trauma for people across Georgia.
It is incredibly practical. We can sit here and talk about the neuroscience of the prefrontal cortex all day, but sometimes the most profound clinical intervention is simply a practice saying, here is a licensed expert. They understand your cultural background. They are available on your screen right now, and you can actually afford to speak with them.
Because removing the friction is the first step of the treatment.
Well said. Let's take a moment to recap the core journey we've mapped out for you today.
Sounds good.
We started by clearly defining the beast. Burnout is a measurable clinical state defined by the WHO as bone-deep exhaustion, a defensive cynicism, and a devastating loss of professional competence.
We dismantled the vacation fallacy, too.
Yes, if you fail the Wednesday test and return to immediate misery, a week off isn't going to fix your altered psychological baseline.
But targeted clinical mechanisms will. Namely, cognitive behavioral therapy to rewrite the spam filter of your boundaries, and behavioral activation to intentionally rebuild your identity outside of your job.
And finally, we explored how practices like CHC are making this critical help accessible across all of Georgia via secure telehealth, utilizing a culturally diverse team of experts, and implementing a financial model that breaks that catch-22 of stress and affordability.
It's a great resource.
If this deep dive resonated with you, if you recognize that bone-deep exhaustion and that locked-out prefrontal cortex in yourself, the source material provided clear, direct contact points.
Definitely reach out if you need it.
You can reach out to them online at thctherapy.com. You can email them at support@cheatcheattherapy.com, or you can call them directly at 404-832-0102.
Taking that first step to ask for help is inherently difficult, especially when your cognitive tank is empty. But the barrier to entry has genuinely never been lower.
It really hasn't. But as we wrap up this discussion, I want to leave you with a lingering question, something to really chew on that builds on the psychology we've unpacked today.
Okay, let's hear it.
We talked about how burnout systematically strips away your feeling of competence. It severs your connection to your hobbies, your friends, and your non-work life.
Yeah.
It essentially hollows out who you are, leaving only the stressed employee behind.
Right.
So the question is, what happens to your underlying sense of identity when you finally undergo treatment and strip the burnout away? Who are you underneath that bone-deep exhaustion once you finally get your life back online?
That is the true, profound work of recovery, discovering what beautiful things remain when the chronic stress is finally gone.
It's a terrifying but incredibly exciting blank canvas. It turns out that exhaustion isn't a permanent failing on your part. It is just a broken baseline.
Exactly.
And with the right tools, the right clinician, and the right access, you have the power to fix the baseline. You just need to take the first step. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. Take care of yourself, check your batteries, and we'll catch you on the next one.